Hi, everyone, and welcome to Powered by Readium, a series of posts and videos in which we present projects that have been built thanks to Readium technologies. Today, I am here with Breno Duarte from the Federal Institute of Alagoas, and we're here to talk about the PNLD reading project, which I will ask you, Breno, to tell me about in just a minute. Maybe as a starting point, you could tell us a little bit more about you, about what your job entails, and about the project.
Of course, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really honored for the invitation. Thank you, Soline, for being very gentle and introducing me to this interview. Um, I'm actually a professor at the Federal Institute of Alagoas, and I'm a researcher at the NEES research group. So NEES is a leading research group here in Brazil, focused on AI education, in educational technology in general, and it's based on the Federal University of Alagoas. So it's a different institution. I am employed at the Federal Institute of Alagoas, but the Federal University of Alagoas is another higher education institution for which NEES is located. NEES has a number of projects, so it's a very big group that has expanded many of the public policy projects that we develop with multiple members of the government, multiple institutions of the government. For example, the Ministry of Education, the National Fund for the Development of Education, which is FNDE, and others. In the Ministry of Culture, we have multiple projects. One of these projects is targeted, which with the ones that I'm currently working with, I'm leading, is the PNLD, which is the National Textbook Program. So the National Textbook Program is one of Brazil's oldest public policies. It's long enough. It has more than 85 years of existence. So it's being implemented for printed textbooks. So it's responsible for acquiring from publishers books and then distributing those books to all schools in Brazil. So we have more than 35 million students, more than a million teachers. So it's a very more than 180,000 schools. So it's a very big project, and it's responsible for this distribution of books throughout the country. The NEES group provides technology through research and development. So we are not really like just software factory or something like that. We are really a research group in which we take what is really in the state of the art and try to implement in the state of practice so that we can be sure that the best solutions are implemented at the public policy level. So we've been assisting MEC and FND in the PNLD national in the program that we are developing the technology to support precisely digital publications. So the program has been traditionally focused on printed publications, right? So they send publications for schools, and they will keep doing that because the print versions are still going to last for many years, I suppose. But the digital publications, they are very new to publishers, new to everyone involved, every stakeholder involved. So we are in the process of, introducing the concept and the technologies and the formats and all that is related to digital publications. So this was hired to provide that support for the government. So the project that we have been formally assigned, I've been leading this project, is the Interactive Reader. We call it, it's a digital reading technology so that we can, after the project is launched, of course, when it's launched, we provide the way to students and teachers to access the digital books. So digital books will begin to be produced by publishers around the country, and then we need the reading technology that can be used by not just teachers and students, but the whole ecosystem that is part of the publishing industry around PNLD. So the publishers itself, themselves, accessibility analysts, pedagogical evaluators, and of course students and teachers.
So one of the first interesting element that I wanted to ask you a question on is the fact that this project is going to operate on a very large scale, obviously. I believe it will provide content to several million students. And I would like to know what made Readium technologies fit for such a sizable projects, in your opinion.
That's true. It's expected to reach 35 million students and more than a million teachers. And we also have um, publishers, I mean, other stakeholders that will take part of this project. So it's required for them to use the reading technology that we are developing. So when we started the project, we had to find out what would be the best or the reference implementations in the market. And of course, EDR Lab and Readium and the standards, we didn't want to do anything that is really just a bubble. We'd like to comply to standards, to the best technologies that are available. And then we started collecting, gathering information both in the market and also in the literature. So we always use the scientific literature to know what is best in terms of innovative technology. So we ended up getting in touch with EPUB formats, web publication formats, which would support some of the requirements that are really important for the PNLD program. So when we got to know EDR Lab and Readium, we saw that we have a really good fit because open source is an absolute requirement for the project because we need to customize, right? We need to have to provide a proof of concept or an MVP for the project initially. So we had like 90 days to do that. And when we discovered Thorium and Readium technologies, we really had the chance to explore and see that the code was good enough, the technology was good enough for us, and it was actually a reference around the world. So we started with a Thorium fork, yeah, and then we started getting in touch with Lohan and then Adrian and then Daniel. So all of them were very gentle and professional working with us. We had a meeting uh, back in May 2024 in the Digital Publishing Summit in Paris. So we could start demonstrating what we have built in the MVP. So the first version that we built was a fork from the 2.4 version. We focused pretty much on supporting our format. So PNLD, when we arrived at the program, they already had a format that was a mix of EPUB through and 3, but it was not one or the other. So it was not really compatible with the reference readers. So our first job was to adapt the reader to support this format natively. So we tried to develop a on-the-fly converter or adapter that could read this format and open it in Thorium, our Thorium fork, right? So we had this first job, and it was quite successful in a short amount of time, given that the whole code base is very well written and open source. So after the meeting in Paris, we discussed the future developments, and we had this requirement for DRM. It's a very strong appeal for publishers. They want to protect their copyrights. They want to their publications to be copyright protected, and they demanded that from the government, that demanded us for this project. So we also find out that Readium LCP was a great alternative, was an open source project that we could implement that. And together with that, we have thousands of books, right, that were produced by the publishers. So with these thousands of books, we had some way to catalog it and list and search and get some feed from these books. So we figured out that OPDS was a great fit for that, and we started working on integrating some OPDF directory in the readers. But we also had a constraint, a limitation, which was to integrate OAuth authentication. So the government, the Brazilian government, works with a global identification system, which is called gov.br, which is kind of a nationwide authentication system in which you can use your ID and password. You can do digital signatures, etc. So that was required to integrate in the readers, and we started doing this integration. But unfortunately, OPDS didn't support that by default. So we had to do our own implementation and integrate that with the OPDS listing that we could had access and started having access at the time. So it was part of our initial fork as well.
Slightly connected to that in a way, um, among other missions, something that's very important about NEES and your different projects is that it is dedicated to providing educational solutions that can help overcome the issue of limited connectivities in some regions of Brazil. So obviously that must have been an important stake in the PNLD reading project. What Readium technologies would you say you leveraged in order to achieve this goal?
So the project itself, when we started doing it, it was like we had a custom fork of Thorium, and we had to, of course, customize it visually. We had to do the integration of OPDS, and then we had the DRM requirement to meet. So to meet that requirement, we had to understand how Readium LCP works, and to our surprise, it works in a distributed fashion. So when we talk about connectivity here in Brazil, it's very, very relevant to consider that most schools, not most, but many schools in many regions of the country, given that Brazil is a very, very large country, they have limited or intermittent connectivity. So in that scenario, you can't expect to have, for example, continuous online, high bandwidth connectivity, because that's not simply not true. So we had to figure out, or at least try to consider that we should adapt the technology to work in a distributed way. And when we understood, after talking to Adrian and Lohan and Daniel, we figured out that Readium LSP was distributed by default. That was kind of a relief, because we can now think about increasing the availability of the publications. So when they become available, which means using distributed technology to support it, that this distribution in, for example, multiple servers, not just one, servers that are not located at a specific place like the cloud, that we could use the cloud or any kind of local server, or even local laptops or PCs that are available at schools. So we just have to increase the availability, and the distributed part will take care of itself, because Readium LCP is distributed. So that was a huge requirement that Readium LCP was ready to meet. So when we implemented the servers, both in testing and in production, we just started doing some of these testing in good connectivity scenarios, bad connectivity scenarios, and we still have some limitations, right? So to just to have an idea, some of the publications in PNLD, they are quite large. They have like hundreds of megabytes to a couple of gigabytes, because they have videos and images and audio. They have this premise of being self-contained. Nothing must be hosted outside of the publication, for many reasons, right, including copyright reasons and some requirements that are in our specs and public calls. So it's kind of a requirement that they should be self-contained. So it's still a challenge, in fact, when we consider connectivity limitations, because the default approach for reading systems in general, including Thorium and Readium toolkits, is to download the whole package and then open it. So downloading the whole thing or not is like a binary solution. So if you go to 90% of that publication fails, you have to start over and try to download it again. And then, of course, that's not ideal, but that's one thing that we're working on. Some kind of innovative solution which focuses on decentralization, peer-to-peer architecture, so we can download the encrypted file from multiple devices. We also think about implementing something to partially and progressive load the publications, so we don't have to download the whole package all the time. We could download just parts of the publication. So, for example, if the publication has 90% of its size is videos, we can download the 10%, which is the rest of the publication, and then download progressively the videos when there is good connectivity or over time. So it's kind of a technology that must be developed just for Brazilian, for our scenario, right? So it's in our roadmap for implementation soon.
Okay. Um, since we're on a more functional standpoint, I have a follow-up question more from the publisher's perspective. How does this program work from the publisher's perspective? How do they get their textbook and all of their educational content to the students? And what criteria do they have to follow in the process?
Oh, that's a great question. I just separated an image that demonstrates the workflow that PNLD implements. So it's kind of a multi-phased workflow, and it all starts with a public call. So this public call is announced to publishers, right? This public call is released by MAC and FND, which are the organizations behind the PNLD project, right? So this public call states, for example, the technical requirements that should be met for publishers to submit their work, their publications, and they go through a subscription phase, which they submit initially a PDF file. That's actually how it's being done today, but hopefully we can change that. That has a problems, results in problems of its own. But initially, given that publishers work with a print version first, right? They try to implement a printed version of the book. They just send it for an initial pedagogical evaluation. So in this pedagogical evaluation, there is a team, which also NEES is acting in this stage. So NEES provides a team of pedagogical experts that open these publications and evaluate them in terms of pedagogy. So it means, are they appropriate for the level that they're directed to? Is the Portuguese or English correct? Um, Anything like spelling mistakes or something like that are part of that pedagogical evaluation, and they have a chance to return to the publishers. So there is a reviewing stage in this phase as well, which means adjusting some things that the evaluators identified, and they go back until it's enough. There is a number of chances that are given to the publishers. So if the book is approved in this phase, the pedagogical evaluation goes to the textbook choice, which is the stage in which schools will have to select those books for the next year's use by professors, by teachers, and the students, of course. So the choice, we also provide the technological support because it's a complex process involving the thousands of schools that exist here in Brazil. And then we go through, if the book is finally selected, we have this fifth stage, which is attribute analysis or resource analysis. They're working together here, but attribute analysis is also integrated with accessibility analysis. So in this phase, we already have the book submitted in a digital version, which is a very close format, as I said, to EPUBs. But we are very strong supporters of HTML5 or HTML in general. So in digital publications in the program, we encourage publishers to use regular HTML, not just XHTML. We encourage them to use multimedia, to use audios, to use interactive elements built in JavaScript. So given the complexity of the publications, we have a lot of complex analysis in this phase. So there is a lot of back and forth between analysts and publishers so that they can provide an adequate fixing of the publications and an adequate compliance to accessibility standards. I mean, the WCAG, etc. This is all required in the specs, so they must comply to it. And when this phase is really finished, then we go to resource analysis, which is about pricing of this publication. So in terms of digital publication, there is a way of doing this. in terms of printed publication, there's another way of doing this, but we provide some form of technological support, pricing models, etc. We try to support FND in this phase as well. Then negotiation is pretty much just FND and graphical production, distribution. This is handled by FND internally and the mailing system, right? The Brazilian mailing system. So the printed books will go, they will be delivered to the schools across the country, and the digital textbooks they will be delivered through the readers, right? So when we launch the project, it's when the digital textbooks will be available.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting how you mentioned accessibility. Of course, it's one of the things that I really like noticed and retained from reading about the project prior to this interview, is how important accessibility and compliance to accessibility standard was in the evaluation, even some of the early evaluations of the textbooks, which I assume is it's always important, but especially when regarding educational content, for equal access to educational content, it's especially important to think about it this way. Which leads me actually, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just to complement. The greatest appeal of digital publication is accessibility, right?
Yeah,
There is this
absolutely.
strong support for interactivity, but it's pretty much a challenging to be balanced between interactivity and accessibility. But it's something that we aim to support in the case of the PNLD program.
Which actually leads me to my next question, because you've mentioned as well the reader and how the textbook will be presented to the pupils across Brazil. So I thought it would be interesting to know how exactly those textbooks, especially the digital versions, are going to be presented to pupils and what digital tools they will have access to in order to read and use this educational content that was prepared and curated over such a long process.
To current date, the readers haven't been launched, but it's in preparation for a long time. We have been developing it, we have been testing it. Publishers have produced like thousands of books, like more than 2,000 textbooks have been written. That includes also novels for children. They are mixed in many public calls. And the first reader that will be released will be the desktop version, which is based on of the Thorium fork. So they will be targeting school labs, students who have computers and notebooks, yeah, at home. But the whole thing is to really provide access to the textbooks, to the content, right? So the reader is a way of an easy way of getting this access in protected form. So the first version that we'll be releasing is the desktop version, which you can see a screenshot. We call it Lip Desktop, but the branding may change for any other reason. But internally, it has been developed as Lip, the Leitor Interativo do PNLD, or PNLD Interactive Reader. So it's a desktop application that will be released probably in late October to early November. But the other versions, the other platforms, they are very appealing as well for the program, right? Because if we take a look at statistically, most students, they have a mobile phone as a device, right? And the mobile version becomes very appealing in this case because they can take it home, they can read the books at home. The teachers can use activities that will be used, they'll be implemented as a homework. So you open many avenues for the use of the digital textbooks. And then we have the web version. The web version is like an intention, a motivation that we have because the web is such a ubiquitous platform for applications. But then we have a limitation for DRM, right? There is no protection of content in the web version, so that's kind of stop, like, not now because publishers will not allow it. So it's a kind of a strong demand from the publishers to have their content protected. But we have web versions that we use internally. So, for example, for the analysts, for the pedagogical evaluators, we have designed web versions of the readers so that it's easier for them to perform their job. So when content protections become a reality, which I think it's going to be soon, according to what I've been talking to EDR Lab, to Adrian, to Lohan, that might be become a reality for us as well.
Okay. So very, very exciting stuff ahead, which is also a perfect transition to the next questions. So obviously, this project is the fruit of a very, very long and hard work. But my next question is more about what will happen after the launch. What, according to you, will be the next developments and even expansions that you will focus on for the PNLD reading project?
I mean, the desktop version is obviously very, very mature right now. Um, this is why it's going to be launched first. But there are some challenges which are kind of cross-platforms challenges that we should tackle for every platform that we offer. But first, we try to parallelize. I mean, we have teams that will be focusing on desktop and its maintenance and evolution. Then we have another team for mobile. Then we have another team for the web version. So we have three teams that will be working together to deliver the readers to all the nation, right, to all of Brazil. But we have several challenges to tackle. For example, we want full support for web publications. That means um, proposing a new simplified version of our format as a web publication. So DR Lab is also leading that format, and it's being actually used more in like a backstage thing, like under the hood. So when you open publications in Torium, for example, it converts on the fly an EPUB file, for example, to a web publication, and it uses the EPUB profile for that. But then what we have been discussing with Adrian and Lohan was to natively support web publication because it implies a need that is not very common in the publishing industry, which is support for the whole web stack. What we're trying to implement is saying to publishers that they could create innovative publications using the whole web stack. Of course, being very careful into how that will address accessibility, not with ignoring accessibility, which doesn't make any sense. But web publication as a format must be completely supported in the readers, and it's not quite complete by now, right? The only profile that is supported is the EPUB profile. So it's the same to open web publication or an EPUB because the reading system will implement the restrictions and the necessary injections that are to comply with that standard, which is EPUB. But we're trying to support like a generic profile, so it means you can use the same power of the web on a publication and render that quite well, right? With some restrictions, with no support for pagination, for example. We have to, have a trade-off in everything we do, but we are quite confident that the way to support web publications is at least our way, the way that we want to tackle it, to implement it at the PNLD program. So our current publications, they are very much heavy in HTML and multimedia resources and interactive resources, as I said before. So web publications become a real contender, like a real interesting format for us. But we have to formalize that. We have to change the specs. So that's the first step that we should take, right? Adapt the specifications. And then we have to build support in the readers. So in that case, we are working with EDR Lab as well, and internally also, trying to test and validate the format. Another challenge that we have is streaming and caching. So as I told you earlier, there is this binary 0 or 1 situation in which either you download the whole publication or you can't open it. So for PNLD, that's quite complicated because if you take the scenario where you have a very large publication like 1 gigabyte and you have restricted or limited connectivity, when you try to download it, of course you can't, you have a hard time download 1 gigabyte in a very limited connectivity scenario. So we have to support some kind of resuming, but also streaming the publication, so consuming it in pieces and caching whatever you consume, so that you don't have to go again and make the same request for that piece of the publication. So that's kind of a technology that must be developed in itself in the readers. We also have this appeal for interactive publications. I guess that maybe some of you know the work that UNSOF is doing in that regard. They have a beautiful project called Accessible Digital Textbooks for All. I recommend you guys taking a look at it. It's a pioneering project that we have dreamed for PNLD for a long time, but they have kind of implemented that very beautifully. They have interactive publications, really. So, for example, they have kind of quizzes and challenges and games inside those publications that kids tend to love, yeah, because it's fun. So we also want to push that to PNLD, and we're actually currently working with UNICEF in that direction. So that's a challenge in itself because publishers need to adapt to that reality, right? So it's hard for them to do accessible digital textbooks by itself. So when we say do interactivity, that's extra work. But one other project that UNICEF is leading is the creation of a tool that uses AI to automate many of the things that are hard to do manually. So we hope that that will also help publishers around the world. So it's a great innovation that we have access and we tend to implement in the program. So we have to be careful about keeping the balance between accessibility and interactivity when that happens. But that's something that we'll be addressing in the specs and in the tools that we provide for the publishers. There is also a challenge about decentralization, peer-to-peer, an architecture that works in offline first mode, which means once you download the publication, you don't have to request repeatedly repeat the request if it's available locally. So we will try to implement many distributed or peer-to-peer strategies to optimize the delivery. I mean, increase the availability and the distribution of the textbooks, so that schools can consume that textbook or that file that implements the textbook or the novel for children in offline mode. I mean, they don't have to go beyond the local network that they are already accessing. That will increase availability, but there is implementation and technology to be developed to achieve that goal. We can optimize distribution in this way. We can also use compression, but that will be up to the publishers to implement. So we are updating the specs to age 2 to 65 video formats so that they can really implement compression. We are trying to implement extra storage for students, for example, right? When they download the books, they can carry it in portable storage, and that will require the readers to improve the user experience when you have external storage. So that would be also a challenge. And finally, we have integrations with VLibras. VLibras is a sign language system, which is maybe some people have heard about HandTalk. So HandTalk was a project developed here in Maceió, where we live here, but it became a very well-known project for sign language with avatars. And Brazil has developed one of its own, which is VLibras, which is kind of an open source project that we can adapt to implement sign language on the web, but we will adapt to use it in the readers, right? So that we can also not just TTS for visual impairments, but also to people with hearing impairments. So VLibras is going to be a very interesting addition to the readers. And that's pretty much our backlog for now, but that's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, that's great insight, but it sounds like you are going to be busy in the next few months. Even after the launch, you'll still have a lot of work to do. But that's exciting. It's a lot of lots of interesting stuff. Um, Before we end the interview, I have one last thing to ask you, which is always something that I like to ask in case there is anything that people want to add. Basically, is there anything that we haven't been able to speak about during the interview that you think will be interesting to the people watching this video?
Well, yeah, I actually mentioned something, but I would like to stress that because it's not so common in the publishing world, apparently. Web publications as a format, for example, I've been discussing that since we started the project, and it's kind of a forgotten project, forgotten specification, except for Readium, which implemented it and evolved it as a spec, and implemented it as a format, but it's a format that is being used more in, under the hood instead of an official format. So what that means is that the whole features that are very particular to that uh, format, which is web publications, they are not being explored. For example, the characteristics, the features that I said about progressive loading, the use of the whole web stack for publications, that has not been explored at all in the publishing world. I guess the publishing world is more like print based textbooks, which become digital versions for accessibility reasons, but they are mostly text and images. So when we think about multimedia and also other types of publications, I can see web publications as a very simple and pragmatic way of doing this. And what we need to do is begin to use it. So NEES and the PNLD program has been, working on with your lab, Adrian Lohan, so that we can really start supporting it, really start experimenting with it, and building support for Thorium, for Readium toolkits, and we're starting with pushing UNICEF to do it as well, because they are generating lots of publications that are very interesting in terms of interactivity, accessibility, but they don't have a packaging format, at least not an official or standardized one. And why not web publications is the perfect fit for them as well. So together we are trying to really push this and start to demonstrating that to the general industry that web publications does have a fit, right? There's a really fit for the format in the case of exploring all the resources for web publications, for interactive and accessible publications that this format can offer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, and I really want to stress how I couldn't agree with you more regarding web publications, especially in regards to, now is the time that we think about all the ways in which they can be used in the future for providing the best experience possible for everyone in the book production chain, from the person who produces the content all the way to the end user, the reader who will consume the content and have it between the hands. Um, with the Readium Foundation, we've been, producing and publishing more and more content regarding web publications. So once again, really want to stress how that is also extremely important for us to talk about right now. Um, well, all I have left to say is thank you so much, Breno, for joining me today and sharing this insight with me. This has really been a great conversation, and I really hope that you appreciate it as much as I do.
Oh, absolutely. That was a real pleasure and honor, because we think that in your lab, Readium, is really what is best. I mean, we try to work with the best because you deserve that title for a reason, right? And when we found out that Readium and Ideal Lab has been working seriously with open source technology that can meet most of our expectations and scenarios, that was a really great discovery. And I hope that we can keep working together and, implement all the innovations that are about to come. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Solène. That was a real pleasure for me as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The honor is all mine. As for you watchers, if you like this interview, don't forget to like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you subscribe, you should also click the bell icon to switch on notifications so that you can be informed in real time about our latest videos. And until next time, have a great day, have a great evening, and I will see you during our next interview.